Hey there, contracting pros, subcontracting gurus, and purchasing experts. If you're seeing me, you already know what that means. They did it. This episode has been cleared for public release. Just barely. But that sort of makes sense because today we're talking about flowdowns. And more specifically, the things you agreed to without fully realizing what you had just signed.
This broadcast has been cleared for public release, but just barely.
Broadcasting from deep inside the Federal Acquisition Labyrinth, this is the GovCon Show. This show is for acquisition pros, wannabe pros, and procurement insiders who need a place to unpack the chaos. We speak fluent contracting and sarcasm. No clearance required. This is the GovCon Show. And away we go!
Welcome to the GovCon Show, where we don't just read the clauses, we figure out what they're actually going to do to you later. I'm Tim Magnuson, and today we're diving into one of the most misunderstood and most casually handled, but it's the most dangerous part of subcontracting. That's flowdowns. The clauses you didn't read, or you skimmed through them, but you didn't carefully read them. And maybe you didn't fully understand those that you did fully read. But now they're sitting quietly in your subcontract, waiting to become a problem. So let me ask you something. How many of you have seen this? Your prime contractor sends over a subcontract package, and inside is the entire prime contract. Every clause, every exhibit, every attachment, just like they got it from the government. And there's even a cybersecurity clause that, based on your current IT setup, would require a miracle, a consultant, and probably a small federal grant to comply with the clause. What do you think happens most of the time in those situations? That's right, the subcontractor would normally just sign it. No questions, no red lines, no idea what they just agreed to. But they got what they worked so hard for, which was a signed subcontract. And now they own it. And here's the most dangerous sentence in subcontracting. We flowed down everything that applied. Did you, though? Or did you copy the program's last clause matrix? Maybe you used a standard template. And then you probably assumed that legal had already figured everything out. And you did that just so you could keep it moving, right? But here's the reality. Flowdowns are not a checklist. They are a decision-making process. And if you're not actively making those decisions, you're absolutely missing things. Let's simplify it. A flowdown is a requirement from the prime contract, and it gets passed to the subcontractor. Sounds very simple, very logical, clean and easy, right? Except it's not, because not every clause applies in the same way. Not every clause applies to every subcontract. And not every clause should be copied word for word. And that's where people get into trouble. Let's break it down the right way. There are three types of flowdowns. The first type, and the most straightforward, is what I call the mandatory flowdowns. Those are required. They're driven by the FAR or DFARs, and there's no debate. You just flow them down because the regulations require you to, right? The second group is, then we have the conditional flowdowns. These are dependent on your dollar threshold, the contract type, the scope of work, which really means you actually have to think. You actually have to consider the scope of the agreement, the type of work that's being done, and how much of it the subcontractor is obligated to. You have to know all that before you can make a decision about whether or not to include each of those clauses in each particular subcontract. And the final type of flowdowns are the discretionary flowdowns. These are the dangerous ones because these are the clauses that get included just to be safe, which really means we didn't evaluate it, but we're including it anyway because maybe we don't really know. But again, before including any of these discretionary flowdowns, you should be thinking about the overall agreement. What's the big picture? What's the big picture? What is the big picture for each particular subcontractor? Just because one clause, discretionary clause, got put in subcontractor A's subcontract, doesn't mean it would necessarily flow to subcontractor B. It's all dependent on the work they're doing and the big picture. So let's walk through how this actually fails, because it never fails in theory. It fails in execution. So let's dig into the common practice of what I call copy and paste subcontracting. Copy and paste subcontracting is where the prime takes the entire prime contract, all of it, attachments, schedules, everything, and the entire clause set, all of Section I, all of Section H, all the exhibits and all the same attachment structure. And they slap their cover document, subcontract cover, on top of it. And they drop it into their own subcontract. No filtering. There's no tailoring of anything. There's no real thought. Copy and paste. There's no regard for the due dates, even on the schedules. The sub has the same due dates as the prime has. There's no regard for whether or not it's applicable. But for the people who practice copy and paste subcontracting, they think, and they believe they've done their job. They have sent out a subcontract for the subcontractor to review and approve. People that do copy and paste subcontracting have no idea the issues that this creates. For example, cost type clauses get included in fixed price work all the time. They include audit rights that don't apply, reporting requirements that no one can meet. And then there's compliance obligations that nobody budgeted for. What people that use copy and paste subcontracting don't understand is that a subcontract is not supposed to mirror the prime. It's supposed to reflect the subcontractor's work. Those two things are completely different. Another issue that many subcontract administrators fail to account for is what I call cyber clause collapse. That's when you're working with a small business, but the small business IT environment consists of no more than Outlook, a local server, but no real cybersecurity infrastructure at all. And they flow down the DFARS cybersecurity requirements. And what happens? They sign it. The subcontractor signs it. They don't implement it because they assumed that it won't be enforced. And then what happens? The audit team shows up. And now the question becomes, show me your compliance. And they can't. That's not a paperwork problem. That's a system failure. That's a subcontractor surveillance problem for the prime contractor. The subcontractor says, that clause doesn't apply to us. The auditor says, you signed it. Game over. So let's take a minute and look at this. Let's look at it from the auditor's view. From an audit perspective, flowdowns fail in three ways. The first thing is the auditor notices are missing are the flowdowns, the clauses that should be there and they're not. Examples? Termination for convenience, the changes clause, inspection and acceptance. And another gotcha is the incorrect flowdowns. You included it, but you failed to tailor it. So now your subcontract says the government may, except the government is not a party to your subcontract. Then there is the overflow downs. You included everything, which creates conflicts, confusion, and risk you don't understand. So now we need to consider the moment, the dreaded moment of the audit. Let's go where it really matters. CPSR. The auditor pulls your file. Everything looks good. Competition, check. Price analysis, got it, check. Documentation, pretty good. So we'll give ourselves a check there too. But then the auditor asks, walk me through your flowdown analysis. And suddenly, you don't have an answer, because what you really have is a template, a clause library, and a belief system, not a decision. So now we need to ask ourselves, why does this keep happening? Flowdowns fail because they live in the gap between legal, contracts, and procurement. Legal says we approve the template. Procurement says we use the template. Contract says it should be fine. But no one says, let's evaluate this subcontract. And of course, we can't talk about flowdowns without bringing up the zombie clause problem. Let's talk about something. Nobody talks about zombie clauses, but those are the clauses that are outdated, they've been replaced, they're no longer applicable, but they're still sitting in your template. Why? Because everybody's busy and templates just don't get cleaned up. They just grow like a compliance landfill. But zombie clauses are the easiest to correct. There is a practical fix. Once a year, you should review all of your templates, all of your boilerplates. Remove those clauses that are outdated. Validate all the citations that are in the template. And if you don't, you are inheriting yesterday's problems. So let's spend a minute talking about the standard template lie, because this one really matters. When someone says, this is our standard subcontracting template, what they're really saying to you is probably mixed contract types, conflicting clauses, unrelated requirements, no explanations. Translation: we didn't think about this, but we expect you to accept it. But what you hear is, we're too lazy to do our job. We want you to figure out what's right, so do it for us. So here's how we fix all of this. Every procurement file must tell a story. We all know that. We've heard that. We've heard that song and dance for a long time. But what you've got to accept is that flowdowns are a part of that story. So ask yourself, can I explain why every clause is included here? And the answer to that question better not be, it's included because it's standard or because it was in the template. If you're doing your job and you're protecting your company, the answer to that question will be something like, it's included because it applies, because it was considered, and because it is intentional. Look at it this way. If you can't explain it, you didn't decide it, right? So let's talk about what good looks like in this situation. A strong subcontract aligns the clauses to the scope, matches contract type, removes irrelevant clauses, and reflects actual risk. And here's the gold standard. Every clause earns its place. If you can't justify it, remove it. Okay, up next, let's do a rapid fire reality check. Let's have a little fun. Here's 5 things that you probably missed in a recent subcontract you sent out. You flowed down a clause but missed the threshold. You included TINA language in a contract where it doesn't apply. I bet you ignored commercial item exemptions. You have no idea if the clause is actually aligned to the scope of work because you probably didn't even read the scope. You included requirements requiring government interaction when the government's not a part of the contract. Yeah, I know. And here's the thing. Flowdowns are not administrative. They are risk transfer, obligation alignment, legal commitments. So for my friends that are preparing subcontracts, if you're not trying to align clauses with the requirements of the scope of work, then you really don't understand the purpose. And for my friends that are receiving those subcontracts from your prime contractor, if you don't understand what you're signing, you didn't just accept the work. You are accepting the consequences. So if this episode made you slightly uncomfortable, that's a good thing. That means you're thinking differently. So the next time you see a subcontract, don't skim it, don't assume, and don't trust the words standard or boilerplate or template. Because what you ignore, it still applies. Now here's the question. What are you going to do about it? If this is already happening in your organization, if your files wouldn't hold up under review, then you don't need more theory. You need to fix it. Head over to govconshow.com and we'll point you in the right direction. But if your team just needs to understand it and you want to prevent these problems before they start, then that's a training issue. I've got you covered there too. Either way, go to govconshow.com because at some point, somebody is going to read your file. And when they do, it needs to make sense. This is the GovCon Show, and this episode was cleared for public release, but just barely.
If today's episode sounded a little too familiar, that's probably a sign. Until next time, keep your files tight, your logic tighter. Remember, if your compliance approach is built on checking boxes, you're building risk. We'll see you next time on the GovCon Show.
This broadcast has been cleared for public release, but just barely.